Before we get started, we do have one little gift for Michael Knowles. Besides being a school that has a lot of protests and known worldwide, we do have a little reference to pop culture. In the Pulp Fiction movie, John Travolta wore this very T-shirt. Wow. And it is our gift for him.
Oh my gosh, thank you.
Of course.
Thank you so much. Thank you for that very kind introduction. I won't put the T-shirt on now. I don't want to get Me Too'd or anything like that before we start. Thank you very much. It is so good to be here at UC Santa Cruz. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you to Yaf and the Logan family, as always, for hosting. I think this is the best way to kick off the first stop on our 2020 speaking tour. Great. I actually didn't know this going in, but apparently UC Santa Cruz is voted the most liberal school in America. So there's no better place that we could do it. Our topic this evening is how democracy goes wrong, which seems like a fitting topic after Super Tuesday. There is nothing like a full year of Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren and Beto O'Rourke to make you reconsider this whole democracy thing. And say maybe King George is looking pretty good right now. You know, there are a lot of leftist activists, people in Antifa. They regularly chant, they say, "This is what democracy looks like," while they're clubbing people over the head. Again, if that is what democracy looks like, yikes, I don't know about that. Until the South Carolina primary a few days ago, Joe Biden looked like a dead man walking, both figuratively and literally. And now he only literally looks like a dead man walking. Figuratively, he's actually doing very well. Buttigieg dropped out and endorsed him. Klobuchar dropped out and endorsed him. Mike Bloomberg dropped out and endorsed him too. The only state that Mike Bloomberg won last night, well, it's not a state, it's American Samoa. Mike Bloomberg spent $600 million to win American Samoa. He could have purchased American Samoa for less money, and so I think he realized that, and he dropped out. It is now a battle between a 77-year-old cynic and a 78-year-old communist. Not a great choice. If either of them wins, they will reach the average American life expectancy within 18 months. Bernie will hit it before the election. The youngest man left in this race is Donald J. Trump, the oldest man ever elected president for the first time. Who says Republicans aren't the party of youth? Joe Biden had to drop out, for those who don't remember. He had to drop out of the presidential race in 1988, 32 years ago, for lying about his academic record. Now Democrats have to choose between that lying, dog-faced pony soldier and Bernie Sanders, who just last week was complimenting Fidel Castro. Not a great choice for the left, but that's democracy for you. Or maybe not. Turns out, actually, the Democratic Party primary is not terribly democratic. For all the left likes to prattle on about wanting to abolish the Electoral College, make everything more democratic, the Democratic Party primary is actually one of the least democratic electoral institutions in the country. If the Democratic Party primary were purely democratic, then everyone, what would they do? They'd just go to the polls one day and vote, wouldn't they? Then the guy who got the most votes would win. But that's not what happens. Instead, the candidate who gets the most votes in each state might not end up winning because he might not win the most delegates, who are the people who were chosen to actually choose the nominee. But actually, if a candidate does get the most delegates, he still might not get the nomination because Democrats have another anti-democratic system known as superdelegates. Superdelegates are party elites who exist to override the will of Democratic voters. They make up a whopping 16% of the total delegates who will choose the Democratic nominee, which gives those undemocratic party leaders a lot of wiggle room to undermine the voters' choices. So the left says they love democracy. Actually, the left undermines democracy at every turn. Hypocritical, absolutely. But they keep up the act. So increasingly now what we hear is that the left wants to abolish the Electoral College. After all, why should 538 random electors choose the president when we could just have everybody vote on it directly? More is always better, isn't it? The Electoral College is only the beginning of the left's plan to expand democracy. In recent years, they've attempted, sometimes successfully, to let illegal aliens vote in our elections. In 2016, San Francisco voted to let illegal aliens vote in certain elections. Many proposals in places like Connecticut, New York, elsewhere go even further. Some try to give illegal aliens voting rights just generally. It's undemocratic, the left argues, to restrict voting rights just to those people who happen to be American citizens. And by the way, having the vote was not enough. The left also wants to make sure that people exercise that right to vote. More votes, more democracy, period. The left-wing voter turnout group Rock the Vote has a program called Democracy Class. They send this into schools all over the country to get teenagers who are by definition ignorant, teenagers who conveniently skew to the left, to go out there and vote. In 2004, P. Diddy told us all that we had to vote or die. What that means, I do not know. Every year, half of the country does not vote, and as far as I can tell, they do not die. I don't know why that is, but they do get people out there to vote. People come out. It shows you just how serious they are on the left, even if those people don't know anything about the candidates, don't know anything about the policies or how government works, even if they don't care, even if they're just voting so that P. Diddy doesn't kill them. There are many other plans to transform our government in the name of democracy. Another plan is to overhaul the judiciary, abolish life tenure for judges, pack the Supreme Court, conveniently with their own judicial nominees. They've been trying that trick for 80 years. They've been trying that all the way back to Franklin Roosevelt. What they never tell you is that more democracy is not necessarily a good thing. Actually, sometimes too much democracy can undermine democracy altogether. Contrary to the left's radical fantasies, our government was never meant to be a pure democracy. It is a republic. What's the difference? The difference goes back to ancient Greece, so I will try to sum up 2,600 years of history in about 30 seconds. We'll see how I do. Direct democracy is a form of government in which the people vote on the laws directly. Obviously, that's not the kind of government we have here in America. A republic is a form of government in which the people vote for representatives and the representatives vote on the laws. The Constitution is very clear that our government is a republic. Article 4, Section 4 says, "The United States shall guarantee to every state in this union a republican form of government." The word democracy appears nowhere in the Constitution. The guys who wrote the Constitution then doubled down on this in the Federalist Papers. They doubled down on their preference for republics. They explain flat out that they are basing the American Republic on ancient republics. Sparta, Athens, Rome, Carthage, all republics, they write. They even all signed the Federalist Papers under one fake name, Publius, the founder of the Roman Republic. So America is a republic, not a democracy. Except it's not that simple, because another term for republic is representative democracy. Even more confusing, the most common definition of democracy includes governments with elected representatives. And then this is the real kicker. It turns out that the governments that the Founding Fathers cite as examples of republics are not actually republics. Athens is probably the most famous direct democracy in the history of the world. And even the Roman Republic, which has republic right there in its name, was not a republic. It was a direct democracy in which the people voted for their own laws. And the senators, they did have senators, but they weren't senators like we had. They merely interpreted the laws. They were not elected. So the Founding Fathers loved direct democracy. Except not really, because in the same Federalist Papers, the founders describe how much they hate direct democracy. James Madison writes in Federalist 10, "It may be concluded that a pure democracy can admit of no cure for the mischiefs of faction. Such democracies have ever been spectacles of turbulence and contention, have ever been found incompatible with personal security or the rights of property, and have in general been as short in their lives as they have been violent in their deaths." Not a great recommendation of democracy. Madison then goes on to differentiate between democracies and republics, and he explains why republics are great and democracies are terrible. So what does that mean for us? Let's leave aside for a moment the squabbling over definitions and take a look at what the founders were really talking about. Put simply, the Founding Fathers feared mob rule. And direct democracies are, by definition, mob rule. The majority of the people call the shots. Forget about justice, forget about fairness, forget about natural rights. If you get 50% plus one, you call the shots, doesn't matter, you win. Now this poses a problem for republics too, especially when the number of representatives gets too large. James Madison puts it in Federalist 55. In all very numerous assemblies of whatever characters composed, passion never fails to wrest the scepter from reason. Had every Athenian citizen been a Socrates, every Athenian assembly still would have been a mob. The problem is not just electing the right people or electing the right representatives. The problem is the number of representatives too. The problem is the extent of the democracy. You can't have too little, you can't have too much. There are limits. There's a delicate balance to be had because mobs have a mind of their own, and mobs do not think very clearly. Passion never fails to wrest the scepter from reason. Well, we see this today all around us, don't we? We see this especially on college campuses, usually from the leftist mobs who shriek and shut down and sometimes even physically attack conservative speakers. Not very reasonable, but very passionate. I have great conversations with leftists. Not all the time, but sometimes. Now, we might disagree on virtually everything, but we can have a nice conversation. I've never had a nice conversation with a mob. I'll give you an example of this. About 8 or 9 months ago, I was giving a speech on this YAF tour at the University of Missouri, Kansas City. And the speech was titled, "Men Are Not Women." Didn't seem terribly controversial when I wrote it. There was a group of leftist protesters that were so infuriated by the statement, "Men are not women," that from the moment I opened my mouth, they started shrieking at the top of their lungs. In the room, you couldn't hear a thing. Then, I feel like if I sat and I talked to a gender theorist, if I sat him down, or sat her down, or sat Zur down, or sat anybody, whoever it is down, and I said men are not women, maybe they would disagree with me, but we could have a conversation. This mob, no way, shrieking, screaming. Eventually they run out of air, they leave, but not before one of these wackos runs up and squirts me with some chemicals in a super soaker. That's very strange. This sort of thing happens to other speakers too. Another mob of leftists gave a female professor at Middlebury College, she gave her whiplash because that professor had the audacity to have a conversation with Charles Murray, a political scientist. My pal Ben Shapiro gave a speech at Berkeley a little while ago. I don't know if you guys caught that one on TV. The leftist threats were so insane at Berkeley, it cost the city $600,000 for security to protect them from a 5'9" Orthodox Jew. It doesn't just happen on campus. It doesn't just happen there. Across the country, Antifa mobs engage in physical violence. Last year, they gave the journalist Andy Ngo a brain bleed and a concussion. Andy's not even that conservative. I think he's an independent. Still, you question Antifa, you're done. Keith Ellison, the former vice chairman of the Democratic National Committee, former congressman, current attorney general of Minnesota, posed smiling with the Antifa handbook, totally endorsing this kind of behavior. A prominent CNN journalist, after a spate of leftist violence, sent out a tweet with an image of Captain America punching a Nazi. That'll show him. You can't reason with a mob. The mob mentality is simply unreasonable. But another problem with mobs and mob rule is that it tramples over the rights of minorities. This is the clearest problem with pure democracy. In pure democracy, minorities have no power at all. Could be racial minorities, could be religious minorities, could be sexual minorities, could be the smallest minority of all, the individual, no power. Any way you slice it, if the majority rules, the minority will have to submit. And then, of course, there's another problem with mob rule. That's the problem of greed. And we're seeing this one a lot now. In a pure democracy, there's nothing to keep the majority from stealing the wealth of the minority. Bernie Sanders talks about this one a lot. Bernie Sanders constantly castigates the billionaires. He used to castigate the millionaires and the billionaires, but then he became a millionaire, and then all of a sudden the millionaires were okay. It's kind of funny how that worked, isn't it? Yeah. Probably a coincidence that they became all right. But it's the billionaires now are terrible until Bernie makes $1 billion, and then they're going to be okay too, and then they'll have to push it to somebody else. Elizabeth Warren does this. Elizabeth Warren has made the same argument on the campaign trail. All the Democratic candidates have called for tax hikes, right? They say the wealthy need to pay more. But Hiawatha herself has taken that a step further by calling for a wealth tax, which is another term for theft. She's saying, not only are we going to tax your income and tax your investments, we're actually going to go into your bank account that you've already paid taxes on, and we're going to just take some more money because we want it. Notice that they are all making moral arguments for theft. On one level, we all know it's wrong to steal, we know it's wrong to envy, we know it's wrong to covet. On the other side, they make these arguments. They think they are totally in the right. They say the wealthy must pay their fair share. The wealthy in this country pay virtually all of the taxes. Doesn't matter, they got to pay more, their fair share. They say it's greedy for you to keep your money, but it's generous for them to take your money. Winston Churchill put it very well. He described socialism as the gospel of envy. It is no coincidence that the people most in favor of removing the guardrails of our government are the very same people clamoring for socialism. The Founding Fathers, as always, knew better. When a majority is included in a faction, James Madison warns, the form of popular government enables it to sacrifice to its ruling passion or interest both the public good and the rights of other citizens. Mob mentality, the limits of democracy. So instead of that pure democracy, our framers created a finely tuned system of checks and balances that gives voice to the people while reining in its most destructive passions. Just consider for a moment how incredible this constitutional system is. The people have a voice in the federal government through the House of Representatives, and the states have a voice through the Senate, but the people elect the state government, and the state government chooses the senators. The Electoral College chooses the president, but the people choose the electors. The president appoints Supreme Court justices, but the Senate has to confirm them. The Congress writes the laws, but the president has to sign and enforce the laws, and the courts can interpret them and even invalidate them. That's just the federal government. The federal government then is checked in power by the state and local governments. Madison put it well, ambition must be made to counteract ambition. Probably the most profound passage in the entire Federalist. He writes, "The interest of the man must be connected with the constitutional rights of the place. If angels were to govern men, neither external nor internal controls on government would be necessary. In framing a government which is to be administered by men over men, the great difficulty lies in this. You must first enable the government to control the governed, and in the next place, oblige it to control itself." No easy feat, but that's how it's supposed to work. A brilliant and intricate system, and the left is doing everything in its power to dismantle that system. It's been going on for 100 years now, at least. The left has been trying to dismantle it in favor of more centralized power. So it started in earnest with the 17th Amendment. The 17th Amendment took the right to elect senators, which the states had, and gave it directly to the people. Well, this was done in the name of democracy, progress, equality, fairness, democracy. But as a result, the state government now has no power against the federal government. So more and more decisions that ought to be made at the state level are made at the federal level. But the federal government is far less connected to the people than the state government. It's far away in Washington, D.C. From where we are right now in Santa Cruz, it's as far as you can get in the entire country. So ironically, laws are now less representative of the will of the people they will govern. Ironically, in the name of democracy, the country has become less democratic. Another example would be abortion. Regardless of what you think about abortion, whether you're pro-life, whether you shout your abortion from the rooftops, it is simply a fact that abortion is not addressed in the Constitution. It is not there. Believe it or not, there are questions that are not in the Constitution. Scalia used to call it SBC, stupid but constitutional. There are many of those things. So, for most of our country's history, abortion was left up to the states. Liberal states had abortion, conservative states did not have abortion. Democracy in action. That was until 1973, when the Supreme Court federalized abortion by inventing some constitutional right. I don't know where it was. It was between a couple lines in invisible ink or something. Supporters of Roe v. Wade defend that ridiculous decision with all the usual slogans, all the ones we hear, equality, fairness, democracy. But in reality, Roe v. Wade made America far less democratic, far less fair, far more divided. Which brings us to the problem of faction. The single biggest fear of our founding fathers. Probably the biggest fear was the British shooting at them. That was number one fear. And then the second fear was probably the Barbary pirates. But the third biggest fear, I would say, was faction. The founding fathers knew that without a delicately balanced system, without a government structure that slowed things down and cooled our hottest passions, a system that would curb the worst inclinations of democracy, freedom would not endure. Democracy itself would not endure. Today, polls consistently show that America is as divided as it has been since the Civil War. We are less free. We have less faith in our democracy. If that's progress, maybe we need to reconsider this whole progress thing, not working out very well. C.S. Lewis said it best. He said, "We all want progress, but if you're on the wrong road, progress means doing an about turn and walking down the right road. In that case, the man who turns back soonest is the most progressive." His friend G.K. Chesterton, Lewis's friend, he had another analogy. This one I think is important for conservatives. It's important for liberals too to learn it. Chesterton described two types of reformers. There's the radical reformer, the reckless reformer, then there's the wise reformer. And the two reformers, they're walking down the road and they see a fence. Just in the middle of a field, right? They have no idea what this fence is for. And so the reckless reformer says, "I have no idea what that fence is for, so I'm going to go tear it down." And the wise reformer says, "Hold on, wait a second. You certainly will not tear that down. Go away, think about it for a little bit, figure out why the fence was put up in the first place. Then, when you figure it out, come back here, and maybe I'll let you tear it down." We are tearing down things that we just simply do not understand, that we don't appreciate. We think we're so much smarter than the people who designed our government, and I assure you, we are not. This is what the reformer, the true reformer, must do, not the deformer. The left has recklessly reformed. They've deformed our Constitution and our country, and we see the results all around us. Rancor, division, radicalism, a loss of faith. Now, prominent leftists threaten to deform our institutions even more radically. They're all talking about it on the campaign trail, and for all the usual reasons: equality, fairness, progress, democracy, every fine thing invoked by every demagogue throughout all of human history. Now is not the time for emotion and sloganeering. It is the time for cold, hard analysis, lest we prove our founding fathers' worst fears to be correct and fail to conserve the very democracy that we've been trying to protect. Thank you very much. Thanks. Thank you very much. Very kind. Thank you very much. So I think we have time for Q&A?
Yeah, I think it's about time for Q&A.
All right.
If anyone has any questions, we'd like you to line up along the back over there. And we'll have one person at a time come up. And you'll come over here, ask a question. We're limiting to one question per person for now. And yeah.
And we have a rule. We have a rule at the Daily Wire. I'm not saying I agree with it, but rules are the rules. If you disagree with me, you get to cut to the front of the line. Now, I look out at this sea of people. You're all very good-looking, well-dressed, highly groomed, so I suspect none of you will disagree with me, but if you do, you can cut to the front of the line.
Hi, thank you for being here and being in Santa Cruz. Have you always been a conservative?
I went through a liberal phase. This is like a confession now. I think that I pretty much came out of the womb smoking a cigar, with parted hair and everything. When I was in first grade, I campaigned in my first grade class for Bob Dole. I was the only man in America excited about Bob Dole for president, including Bob Dole. So I was kind of a young Republican. Then I went through a little liberal phase from, 13 or 14 until 14 and a half, something like that. But I was in a very liberal place. I was exposed to these ideas, and so I considered them for a long time. And then I was an atheist from 13 to maybe about 23, somewhere in there. So I did have what you would call liberal, secular, or atheist views for a long time. And then, thank God, I got shook of them. We'll take a follow-up. Yep.
Sorry. What made that switch? Like, I think there's a lot of youth today that can benefit from hearing. Like, what made the light bulb come on?
So I think in all of it, it helps to be a little bit of a contrarian, because if you're a little bit of a contrarian, you don't just buy everything you're hearing around you. So, I mean, it's just a lot of people in this room, I bet, are a little bit contrarian. And so you would hear all of these things, and you say, nah, I'm a little skeptical about that. Hold on a second. When I was 14, I kept hearing everywhere in the mainstream media that Islam is the religion of peace. You know, it's all about peace, not about anything but peace. I thought, you know, I'm just kind of looking around the news cycle here. I'm a little skeptical of that one. So then I read the Quran, just out of interest. I said, hold on, maybe it's not true. And you could do this with a lot of political issues. So that helped. And I noticed one thing that was very helpful in both politics and coming back to the church, which is when I was in college, I had all these very smart people, and they were all liberal atheists. And there were some of them much smarter than me. But I noticed the smartest people were conservative, and they were Christian, and they were part of a liturgical tradition, and they believed these things that the whole rest of the culture thought was so wacky and insane. But they were the very cream of the crop, and I thought that's interesting. And you look back at the greatest geniuses of human history, and they all seem to be religious, and they all seem to be, in some ways, conservative. They enjoyed the tradition that they were coming up from. They seemed to be educated. So that turned a light bulb on, and like Ernest Hemingway says, it happened gradually, then suddenly. And, and here we are today. Thank you.
Hi, Michael. Big fan.
Thank you.
My question is regarding immigration and everything like that. And you and I, we obviously both disagree with the left when we want a border wall, we want security and everything like that.
Yeah.
But my little disagreement, and correct me if I'm wrong, if I'm misrepresenting your point of view, is a lot of mainstream conservatives will like say, we want legal immigrants, over and again. And the reason for that is I have like a couple points, and I'll try to make it brief because I know we have a lot of questions and everything like that, is, a lot of states are going like blue at this point. Texas is on the verge of going blue. Virginia just a few months ago was going blue. And it doesn't seem like the trend is like meaning to stop. And even beyond that, like beside like states going blue, like H-1B visas, for example, like a lot of Americans are losing jobs because of immigrants, typically from like Asia and India are taking away jobs and everything like that. And I'll try to wrap up and everything like that. Like, Michelle Malkin makes this point as well. Like, there's like a couple points like from AFPAC, America First Pact, and everything like that. And she's kind of getting ousted. And so my question, just to wrap it up, is it still necessary in today's day and age to have immigration in today's day and age, even with all its many consequences?
Well, it's an excellent question. Immigration is a complex subject, and I think for the people who say open up the borders and let everybody in, obviously that's ridiculous, and people who say at all times we should shut the borders and build a big wall, I think that's probably ridiculous too. There's a very good argument right now, not just for stopping illegal immigration, but for drastically reducing legal immigration as well. That's not a fringe viewpoint. I mean, William F. Buckley Jr. made that argument on firing line in the 1990s. So I think that's certainly a conversation worth having, and right now we have I think the highest foreign-born percentage of the population that we've had since something like 1890. So I'm not as concerned about the electoral results of this. I mean, obviously the Democrats are pushing for open borders because they think it's going to help them at elections. I'm not terribly concerned about that. It's something to watch. It's something to be aware of. But it's not as though 100% of immigrants are going to be voting for Democrats. I think the bigger issue is assimilation to the United States, because obviously we're a country that since my great-great-great-great-granddaddy came over here on the Mayflower, have had very, very divergent views. They've come from very different backgrounds. And so you need to have a common American identity. And we've done a very good job at that throughout much of our country's history. But there have been periods where immigration has become a huge problem that people have had to dial it back a little bit and encourage assimilation. Unfortunately, we're now at a moment where the radical left is actively discouraging assimilation, which is another argument to take a look at immigration and reduce those levels. But I think to create some hard and fast rule and say no more immigrants are ever coming into America, I think that's foolish. I think it has nothing to do with our country's history, and I think we would regret it down the line. Politics is circumstantial, politics changes with the times. Just as it's foolish to recite the same old platitudes that people were saying in 1960 as though they're still relevant 100% today, so too it would be insane to create some one hard and fast rule in politics. You've got to respond to the situation on the ground. And so right now I think conservatives are completely united on the need to reduce immigration. Now, if we get that assimilation problem under control, if we make sure that Americans aren't being left behind, if we make sure that American workers aren't being totally destroyed by the immigration regime, then I think it probably in 30, 40, 50 years, we would have another conversation, and that would be perfectly fine. Yep.
Hi, Michael.
I just have to point out, your shirt says, tank top, legalize cocaine.
Absolutely. Is it ethical or moral to mutilate the genitals of a baby under any circumstances, even religious circumcision, no matter, like, should moyels and anybody who at all mutilates a child's genitals, should they be put in prison for 5 years and put on a sex offender registry?
No, that's crazy. That's crazy. You know, in the United States, we've always had a pretty strong respect for religious faith. And I mean, our country was founded, as I mentioned, by my great-great-great-granddaddies who came over on the Mayflower. They were pretty zealously religious. And circumcision is a ritual that's taken place in world religion for a very long time. We see it all throughout the Bible. We see Christ himself was circumcised. And so if it's good enough for Jesus, it's good enough for me, and I don't want to pass a law against it.
Hello, Michael. Thank you so much for your speech. I guess I have a bit of a question relating to your personal views. I really appreciate you talk a lot about your Catholic faith in this talk, on your show, and one thing I was wanting to ask you about is where you see the focus on individualism being too far within both the left and the right, and where you think the government should advocate for moral principles on the basis not so much on individual choice, but on the reality that we are all interdependent in a sense, and that morality is what affects day-to-day interactions. And specifically, to give it some more concrete context, for example, I think something that's pretty socially destructive, something like pornography, for example, right?
Yeah.
I think you could find even advocates on the left and the right to advocate against pornography and ban it like they have in Asian countries.
That's an excellent question. It is certainly the case, and I've made this argument before on my show, that the right has bought into too much of a left-wing premise on hyper-individualism. There's nothing particularly conservative about hyper-individualism. Now, if we're talking about individual rights in the American tradition, obviously there's quite a lot to conserve there. But if we're talking about this left-wing idea that some right-wingers have bought into, that we're all merely and primarily free-floating atoms, and we just popped into this world, I don't know, out of thin air or something, and we have no bonds of loyalty to our family or our community or our country or our God, that's just absurd. And that's a very, very small sliver of the great long conservative tradition. This is part of the reason why we have a loneliness epidemic in America, is I think because the right and the left have agreed on this kind of hyper-individualism for so long. You now see rates of depression, stress, suicidality going through the roof, especially among young people. And so I think it's very, very important to focus on, not on the individual as the atom of society, because we're not the atom of society. Probably the smallest political unit you'll find is the family. And conservatives used to understand that, and now they're starting to lose that. I think a lot of it is a revisionism back into a kind of more modern libertarian ideology on what the framers thought. The framers certainly would not have endorsed drag queens story hour, okay? They would not have endorsed drag queens twerking in front of toddlers or anything like that. You bring up the issue of pornography. We do have regulations on pornography in the United States. Within the last 10 years ago, 11 years ago, we prosecuted and incarcerated a pornographer for obscenity. And yet now we're told we couldn't possibly regulate internet porn. You know, you have to show an ID if you want to go buy a Playboy. Me, I just read it for the articles, but people tell me that there are naked ladies in there. So you already have all of that, you know, today in the United States, to show you how long-standing this is in the country. 19 states have laws against adultery. Now, I'm not saying that we all want laws against adultery here. I'm just pointing out that there is a history, an American conservative tradition of weighing in on these kind of social and moral questions. Until the mid-20th century, cohabitation, shacking up, was against the law. And there are probably many people in this room would not like that to be changed back to the 1950s. But of course, the state has some role here. There's a lie that we're often told, which is that you can't legislate morality. Oh, how we usually hear this from the left. They say, we can't legislate morality. Well, I've got news for you. All laws legislate morality. Every single one. Laws against abortion legislate whether or not you can kill, whether or not you can murder. Laws about taxes, lowering your tax rate, are moral laws about how much property the government can confiscate from you. All laws are moral laws. The government is already weighing in, and the idea that secular liberalism, you know, the kind of modern squishy leftism, that's somehow neutral, that's not making moral claims, that's absurd. Look at Drag Queen Story Hour going into public schools and try to hold up that argument. So I think it's important for the conservative movement to start thinking more from a cultural and a moral and a spiritual dimension. And I think, you know, in this new crazy age that we're in, post-Trump, where we're having new conversations on the right, I think we're doing just that. It's a very good thing.
Hi, Michael. I think it's really gross that you agree with cutting a baby's penis. That's just the most disgusting thing I've ever heard in my entire life. I mean, when I see a baby, I think, cool, I don't think I want to cut off their penis, or I want to cut off the 50% of the mobile skin, or I want to take away their foreskin, which has over 15 different biological functions. I mean, like, I lost some respect for you when you gave me that answer, because, like, don't cut children. Don't cut your daughter's vagina. Isn't that basic? Like, why on earth would you say, yeah, you can do that to your child? I mean, that's so disgusting and obscene and primitive and barbaric.
I don't want to ask if there's any backstory here that's like, I don't want to know, I don't want to get into that. But to your real point, I think the argument you're advancing is a very modernist argument. Pardon me for saying it, it's a very leftist argument. What you're saying is, there's been a tradition that has existed since time immemorial that for, you know, most people in this country are Christian, the God who walked on earth, it was a tradition that was good enough for him. And what you are saying is now under the light of cold scientific rationalism, I'm going to say it's a bad thing and we're going to get rid of it. I think there are a great many people who make those arguments, but I would recommend that if you're going to make those arguments, you have a little bit of humility. You know, I think those arguments come from a place of pride. I think that's where leftists make a lot of their arguments. When I look at a tradition that's made it through all of the ages, that's made it from the very, very before memory all the way to the present, I don't look at that as just some very old thing. In many ways, I think of it as the newest thing, the freshest thing. Chesterton, Edmund Burke, great conservative philosophers would talk about it that way because it's endured throughout time. It has some significance. It has some meaning. We're not, I mean, you're talking about it in very materialist terms. We're just bags of meat and bags of flesh. Winston Churchill put it very well. He said, when great forces are on the move in the world, we learn that we're spirit, not animals. The destiny of man is not measured by material computations, even the kind of gory ones that you're describing right now. And obviously, this ritual has a deep religious significance. It has for a long time. And I would have a little bit of humility in the face of that ritual. Yeah. Thank you. You know, I got to tell you, the percentage of circumcision questions we've gotten tonight is higher than the average that I usually get.
Hi, Mr. Knowles. Thank you for being here.
Yeah.
So my question is regarding social conservatism.
Yeah.
So homosexuality was once condemned and disavowed by the conservative movement and in society in general not 10 years ago. Now it is accepted and promoted in the conservative movement and encouraged in society. My question is, with the way conservative movement is trending, when do you think the time will come that social conservatism is left behind by the conservative movement? And if not, where should we draw the line to stop accepting things like transgenders, drag queens, and things of that nature?
Well, it's a very good question because the flaw in your question is you're talking about the conservative movement as though it's one thing. And it's not, and it never has been. So the conservative movement, such as it is undergoing a big change right now in the post-Cold War, now Trump era. But let's just look at the more recent one, the first one in modern history, the post-war conservative movement. Bill Buckley, National Review. The brilliance of Bill Buckley was not that he united a bunch of people who all agreed on everything and then they won a bunch of elections and Ronald Reagan became president. It's that he formed a coalition. So he formed a coalition of economic libertarians, a coalition of social conservatives, religious conservatives who opposed the Soviet Union, and foreign policy hawks. Right? These people disagreed on one another in a great many ways, but they united because they all hated the USSR. The economic conservatives, or the economic libertarians because of the collectivism, the social conservatives because of the atheism, and the foreign policy hawks because of the imperialist ambitions. They all disagreed. That movement went into flux. That movement after the Cold War stopped making a lot of sense. They didn't have as much in common. They didn't have a common enemy. Now, probably the common enemy that we're talking about is the woke culture. You bring up the issue of sexual preference, homosexuality, transgenderism, even gender theory. So you've got this conservative movement, or whatever it is, anti-left movement, that has people who are trad Catholics and homosexual atheists. You say, what on earth could unite these people? What appears to have united them is this anti-woke culture, anti-censorship, anti-political correctness, anti-deplatforming, anti-all of these issues that we see the left doing to every single one of us. Does that mean that we all have to get along and agree on everything? No, absolutely not. It means that we're going to fight an enemy and vanquish that enemy, and then a new coalition is going to form. And nobody is going to stop you from losing your social views or your religious views, moral views. Nobody is going to stop the homosexual atheist from caring a lot more about, say, low taxes and anti-censorship, right? We're coming to this because of different issues, but we have a common foe who's going after us all. I think it's perfectly fine to join together. All coalitions that have ever succeeded have been oppositional. They've all been against something. I have an article about this in The American Mind. It's okay to be against something for a time. That's how you achieve a political goal. Then you reassess and figure out the next goal once you've accomplished it. Yep.
Hi, Michael. I wanted to follow up on your topic of woke culture with a term that's been kind of thrown around a lot, and can often be seen when you look it up on college YouTube channels. The phrase "diversity is our strength."
Yeah.
The term itself has received a backlash of its own, with others saying that unity is our strength. And in response, the colleges themselves have doubled down on this standard, and it's not just colleges. Countries themselves and different movements across the world have done this down. For example, in Sweden right now, they have a migration problem, and what is their response? An activist movement down there creates this YouTube video called "Det nya landet" or the new land, which says that the Swedish population there must assimilate to immigrants rather than the other way around. Further doubling down on the topic that diversity is our strength. Is diversity really our strength or unity, and why?
Well, the thing is, like all slogans, it's wrong, but it has a point. This is why I try in politics not to argue from slogans, is because you start to believe that that's sufficient as an ideology, and it never is. So obviously, unity is our strength, right? Out of many, one comes the United States, e pluribus unum. But also, the fact that we have different kinds of people and different points of view, I think has been a great help to the United States. It's helped the United States develop. It's part of the reason why the U.S. has been religiously tolerant for a lot of its history, why it hasn't fallen into a ton of religious violence, and ironically, or maybe not ironically, why it remains more religious than the countries of, say, Western Europe. So there are some benefits, and there are some downsides to it. The trouble that I think people have with that mantra, that particular slogan, is it's used by leftists who don't actually want a sort of rich and diverse America. They want a whole lot of different little Americas that are separated and actually have nothing to do with one another and don't really like each other and don't like their cultural heritage. And obviously that's a horrible idea. That doesn't benefit anybody. That doesn't benefit people who were born here. It doesn't benefit immigrants. It certainly doesn't benefit the country. It just weakens the country, which the left always tries to do. So what I would encourage people to do is try to think beyond the slogans. You know, you don't have to have a false dichotomy of we should have a completely homogenous, exactly the same, they all look like identical twins population, and there's no such thing as a limit to, say, immigration. We should just have 300 million immigrants a year come into the country, and that would make it really great. Obviously, those are two false choices. And when you think beyond slogans, which is very difficult for the left, it's certainly easier for the right, I think you begin to see the issue a lot more clearly.
Okay, so I got to cut the line because I kind of disagree.
Great.
I grew up surrounded by leftists in a very left area, and I'm obviously at a significantly left school.
So I've heard.
And no, but I'm here because I want to understand. You touched on this 2 questions ago with the coalition, I think particularly that Reagan pulled on in the 70s between libertarian economics and social conservatives. And my question for you is, how do you deal with what seems to me to be a contradictory ideology that you talked about, how a lot of powers enumerated in the Constitution have been given to the federal government that weren't given to the federal government, how the states have lost power, how even I would say some of the federal offices have gained power that they were never supposed to have originally in the text of the document. But the text of that document, one could argue, does talk about keeping religion separate from state, especially I know Thomas Jefferson, I'm not quite as sure about the other founding fathers, and I don't want to speak out of information I don't have, was very virulent about making sure that there would never be an America with like a government-enforced religion. So I was wondering how you handle that dichotomy, and if what like conservatism really is, if you wanted to, not like, because that's a straw man concept, but I meant more if you wanted to say to liberals or to people who want to be moderate conservatives, or just what you would say about bringing together the country in moderation in general, or sliding to different scales or being open to new opinions, how you unite those two very disparate ideas of telling people what to do but giving people the power to do what they want, like with their money and taxes.
Sure. You're asking, I think, really one of the ancient questions about like free will and grace, and so we won't be able to get into that topic, but we can get into the role of religion in America, which is people really misunderstand the role of religion in America. You mentioned Thomas Jefferson. When he ran for president, he was called by his opponents a howlin' atheist. He was one of the more antithetical to religion, though he did come up with a translation of the Bible, but it wasn't a great translation, so anyway, we can leave that be. What the Constitution says is not that we will not have religion in America. What the Constitution says is that there will not be an established church according to the federal government, so there won't be one church that the federal government recognizes. State governments could have established churches, but the federal government could not, because there are different powers, as you just mentioned. What one has to acknowledge before we even start discussing the Constitution or start discussing our country is that it is founded on fundamentally religious premises. We are given natural rights. Okay, we have these we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. I might be able to get the Democratic nomination for president because I could say that and Joe Biden couldn't. We are endowed by our creator. And so the founding fathers, in the very first document, the heart and soul of the country, are acknowledging God. We have God on our currency, one nation under God. We began sessions, we still begin sessions of Congress with prayer. The country is religious. John Adams, second president of the United States, said the country is built for a moral and religious people. It's wholly unfit to the governance of any others. And there's a revisionist view now that all the founding fathers were atheists or something. It simply was not true. And it cannot be true because all governments must have religious premises. As St. Andrew Breitbart, the patron of Hollywood conservatives, once said, politics is downstream of culture, but culture is downstream of religion. Cult and culture come from the same root word. What a culture worships will define that culture. And so I think now the modern left tries to pretend they don't have a religion, right? So they say, no, we're totally neutral. We take no stand whatsoever. But also, men can be women. But we take no stand. And what they're saying, that usually the secular left is not very religiously literate. But just to use that one example, this gender theory, the idea that my body, my physical body, has nothing to do with who I am. That actually, I look like a man, right? But if deep down I feel like a woman, then I am a woman, and my body has nothing to do with that. And I actually have to change my body, mutilate my body to look more like a woman. That is an ancient religion. It's an ancient heresy called Gnostic dualism. Got rejected by the church a long time ago, but these bad ideas keep cropping back up and back up. I don't even mean to focus just on transgenderism. I use it to show that even secularists, even atheists, even leftists have their own religious ideas that they are foisting on other people. They just don't happen to know it. And so part of what politics is about is persuading one another, coming together, having some common reverence for the country, having some unity to one another, and figuring out what it is we believe. Because all laws are going to relate to our view of morality. It is impossible not to legislate morality. And so if you've got half the country who's not even admitting that they're playing the game, it's very difficult to do that. But if they would acknowledge it, I think, then we could have a mature conversation. We might even start to agree on something.
I have a quick. In God We Trust was added to the currency much later in the
Yeah,
U.S.'s
in the
history
20th
than
century.
the thing. And I would also say that especially those parts of the Constitution and the preamble, and not just the preamble, but the main first section articles.
Declaration, yeah.
The Declaration, sorry, you're right, the Declaration of Independence. They borrowed heavily from Thomas Paine and other people like Caesar
Another
de Becker.
howling atheist.
Yeah, another, and I was going to say, and like Caesar de Beccaria, and they all borrowed from each other, and Rawls and not John Rawls, sorry.
They didn't borrow from him.
Yeah. I'm forgetting he was an economic theorist.
John Locke.
Yes, thank you. And all of those came from, and I would agree that people have some sort of belief system they're not always outward about, but those were all part of this movement of kings don't have divine rights and this sort of beginning of secular atheism, if you will.
Sure, I mean,
and so that's in the document. It becomes kind of contradictory.
I don't think it's contradictory. I mean, they certainly didn't care for divine right monarchy, and they like to overthrow monarchy, but they didn't reject religion outright. I mean, even Thomas Jefferson, who, I kind of agree with the howling atheist description, but he didn't utterly reject religion. He was still a religious man, and as were all of the other founding fathers. The reason for that being that they couldn't help it, And when you mentioned that In God We Trust was added to our currency later, so it wasn't added in the late 18th century, it was actually added in the 20th century. Sure, why was it added? Why was that in the fiber of the country? Why is it that our country is so much more religious than other countries around the world? Why is it that they all share a basically similar religious view, with some variation here and there? It has to do with the spirit of our country. The country didn't just spring out of the thin air in 1776. We're now celebrating the 400th anniversary of the Mayflower. Those guys had religion. They were not howling atheists, most of them. And so I think if we want to have a deeper understanding of our country's basis, our country's character, where we're going, we have to move past these kind of shallow lines of saying, well, look at those two words that a guy wrote in a letter. See, we are an atheistic country. The evidence doesn't bear that out. You see the evidence of that all around us, all the churches all around us. And so I think when we acknowledge that, we can have a deeper conversation, and we might even bring you over to our religious side. Who knows?
Hi. So recently at UC Santa Cruz, we've had these protests for cola. I'm guessing you know about them.
I just heard about it.
Yeah.
Maybe you could explain it, though.
So basically, the grad students are wanting a raise in their wage because they're apparently contracted to only be able to work here, and they can't actually work off campus. So I was wanting to ask, what would you say in response to the cola protests?
Do you know how much they get paid per hour?
No, I'm pretty sure just minimum wage. Huh? 60% raise? I don't know.
So they're calling for a 60% raise, right? So they're calling, the demand that they're making right now is to raise their wage to a minimum of $50 per hour, because they're working 20 hours a week. Mind you, they're students, right? They're not professors. They are actual students who are getting an education here who demand to be paid $50 per hour. You know, if I could have been paid $50 per hour in school, I don't think I ever would have left. I think I probably would have stuck around there a long time. And what these grad students have done is they've refused to grade their papers. They've refused to do their job. These are students, but also in so much as they are employees, they are government workers who refuse to do their job. They are damaging the educations of their own students. They're whining and screaming like little children for wages that most people never will get. I mean, very significant wages. And I think they should all, 100% of them, be fired. I would take a follow-up.
Hi. So a little background on this question. I grew up an Orthodox Jew, still consider myself an Orthodox Jew and a conservative. However, I noticed this originally in Judaism. I think over the past, well, since the beginning of Judaism, we have increasingly become more progressive, more open to women's rights, and all the issues such as like gender, racism, all of that kind of stuff has become more of a topic in Orthodox Judaism nowadays. And with the conservative movement and the reform movement in Judaism, we have like continuously become more open and more liberal. So I guess my question is, and I think that kind of also relates to America nowadays. I think we have increasingly become more progressive. And I guess my question is it inevitable that our country continues to become more liberal and more progressive?
It's funny you mention Judaism as the example here, because I actually find anti-racism in the Old Testament. I mean, I find it in the case of Ruth, right, who's not a Jew, but then she's accepted in, and your nation will be my nation, and your God will be my God. I think a lot of modern liberals want to claim that everything good and wonderful that's ever come into the world sprang out of their own unfettered intellect 2 days ago, but actually, you know, our forefathers might have known a thing or two. It does seem that the country is sliding into liberalism, and yet, there are these moments where things turn around. You know, we were told before the 2016 election, 99% chance that the left-wing candidate was going to win, and then that didn't happen. People said no. Now, if you're asking, will time just stop? Will we remain exactly as we were in the 13th century or in the 5th century? No, that's not going to happen. That has never happened. Fashions have changed. Tastes have changed. That will always go on. You know, if you leave a fence, a freshly painted fence, a white fence out in the field, and you come back 3 months later, it's not going to be a white fence. It's going to have stuff on it. It's going to change. We are constantly in a torrent of change. The key here is to not lose our mooring. It's to not lose what we believe in, the things that actually matter to us. And I think the United States has actually done a pretty good job of this. And when the United States has veered into kind of radical leftism, we've pulled it back. I mean, you saw this. There was a self-avowed socialist who was supposed to sweep the country and clear the nomination of a major party, and it didn't happen. Not yet, at least. You know, things slowed down. We put the brakes on in this country a fair bit, and every so often there's a big awakening. You know, if you in the 1970s had said, "What's America's future look like?" people would have said, "Gas lines, socialism, hostages all over the place, not looking good." And then a couple years later, you get Ronald Reagan, you get Morning in America. You get a full quarter century of prosperity and hope and liking your own country again. These things happen, you know. It's not just that we're inevitably rolling on the tides of history. Individual people do matter. They are the main aspect that matters in history. And anyone could do this. That's why we're all out here, isn't it, right? That's why we're all trying to deal in these ideas, trying to go out and spread a message that can hopefully make America great again.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, I want to say thank you so much. That's all the questions we have for tonight.
All right, thank you so much. It's such a pleasure to be here. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Very kind. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you, guys.